Hello everyone. So today I'm gonna talk about rods. Talk about every rod type, length, action, everything that you need to know for every style bait, for every application. You get it? Not gonna go into brands or anything. I will not say that you need to use spiralite rods, which I have talked about numerous times. I will not get into that. If you want to know about spiral wrapped rods, go and check out this video. I've talked about it many a time, and I'm not going to talk about that right now or any other brands. Brands don't matter. I'm going to go into all the details about rods for certain applications and why they're better, and I'm also going to give you a little bit of a tip about rod sizes. So anyway, we'll start with this one right here, the spinning rod. Okay, spinning rods, in all honesty, are not something that I care too much about. The only thing that I care about is that it's a medium. It has a good tip on it, a nice light tip, and it's long enough. A lot of spinning rods are under 7 feet. For the most part, that's kind of like the general ones that you see around. I never want to fish anything under 7 feet. I'm just saying. That's for casting, that's for leverage on a fish, that's with every single type of rod, even a spinning rod. But really, all I like to look into about spinning rods is it light, like it feels really light, like this one does, and is it a medium action? You want that medium action that will work for any light line finesse tactic, which is all you should be fishing with a spinning rod. As far as bass fishing goes, a medium spinning rod, and I never go smaller than 7 feet, and that's just my recommendation on that. But to be honest, spinning rods don't really matter that much. Next, let's talk about kind of the do everything rod, but not really. So this is the rod that you want to use for really any style moving bait other than deep crankbaits. But for everything else, there's only one rod you need. Chatterbaits, spinnerbaits, crankbaits, lipless crankbaits, square bills, whatever, swim baits, as long as they're not heavy swim baits. There's only one rod you need, and this is the rod and reel that I take out everywhere. It's always the first one I got something tied onto. It's my most used one, no matter whether I'm fishing a pond, a lake, reservoir, I'm fishing on the bank, the boat, the kayak. This is always the first one that I have tied up, and the one that I use most of the time, like until I figure something out, or if I'm flipping and I know I'm flipping, whatever. But this is the one rod that I use all the time. Now, this is a 7'6" medium heavy, and some of you might be like, 7'6", isn't that real long for those style baits? Nope, it's the perfect size. Alright, I'm not a big dude. I'm normal height for a man, and 7'6" is perfect. It has lots of tip on it, further casting with the further length, as well as more leverage on a fish with the bigger rod length. It's just, I've tried everything, and I have now just gone to 7'6". But here's the deal on spinning rods, and this is the tip. Alright, the tip is that now I use 7'6" for pretty much everything. Every style rod, I keep them all pretty much the same length, and that is on purpose. It's easier to get used to switching from rod to rod. Say you're throwing a crankbait or something, or you're throwing the chatterbait, the spinnerbait, whatever, and then all of a sudden there's a laydown or something, you want to flip a jig into it or something, pick up the other rod, do that. It's so much easier if the rod length is the exact same. It's just repetition. You're so used to the rod being the same length, kind of the same action, obviously same brand helps as well. Like, I pretty much use the same brand. Just pick a rod length that's good for you, but definitely for all these style baits, I want to go shorter than 7'3", to be honest. 7'6" is amazing for all this stuff for the casting distance. When I'm fishing any of those moving baits, I'm covering water. I want to cast way out in front of wherever I'm at, whether I'm on the boat or the kayak or the bank. I want to cast way out there and then cover water, come back in. So I want that extra length with that rod to be able to cast further distance. And as far as action, medium heavy, it's the most common action on a casting rod, and it's really kind of the most usable. I mean, let's be honest, I could throw anything pretty much on this rod and not be worried about it, except maybe flipping into real heavy cover, and then also deep diving crankbaits, which you could pretty much throw everything on this rod. If you have one rod pick, 7 foot to 7'6", medium heavy, I would say go as long of rod as you can, 7'6", medium heavy. Next is flipping or jigging, even football jigs, any heavy jig fishing. This also for flipping and pitching a Texas rig with a heavier weight on it. Really those kind of slow moving but heavy baits where, you know, you get a bite and you're gonna reel down and just jack those fish, and also fishing around heavy cover and all of that. Really anything applicable for a jig or a heavy Texas rig flipping setup. 7'6", heavy. Alright, a heavy rod. I do not go extra heavy or the crazy stuff like that. Stick with the same size pretty much all the time now. Everything I want, this 7'6" is the size that I found to be the best for me, and really for anyone, I would say upsize. A lot of guys throw those like 7 foot or 7'3" rods. Upsize, you'll see a huge difference in controllability, the leverage, the casting, all that stuff. That's why I stepped up a few years ago, even though, like I said, I'm a shorter dude, and I use 7'6" pretty much on everything. So yeah, 7'6", heavy. Step up to heavy. That gives you more backbone in the rod. It's not as light of a tip. It's better for those applications where you're trying to pull that fish out of cover. Instead of that rod just giving into that cover, you're able to kind of rip them out better, Also, like I said, on jig fishing, if you're not setting the hook like a man, then you're not jig fishing right. You just need to rip their face off, pretty much, to get a good hook into that fish. And a heavy is going to withstand that shock of just tearing into them. Now, let's go to topwater. Topwater rods are a little different for me, because I'm going to use everything on a top water rod. Every style. Frogs, whopper ploppers, spooks, buzzbaits, everything is used on a top water rod. The same rod for the most part. I have a couple of them, but it's the exact same rod. With a top water rod, like I said, I'm using it for everything. Alright, frog fishing, twitching that rod, getting that frog to walk. Also this bait, like twitching it, getting that frog to walk. Whopper plopper, just casting and reeling, maybe every once in a while popping it. But the certain action of popping that rod, I want that rod actually a little shorter than the 7/6, but still I try to keep it close to that 7/6. But this is actually a 7'4" heavy action. That is for those giant hook sets on topwater. It does not matter what topwater you're throwing. When that fish takes that bait from top and drags it down, it's a lot of force from up, down, and then back up. Just that shock of it. The good backbone of a heavy rod is going to get a better hook set in them, and that goes for every topwater. Now granted, sometimes they'll just catch themselves. Then, like I said, shorter than a 7/6. Something you can handle. A 7-footer is good. Some companies make topwater specific rods that are like frog fishing and stuff that are 7 foot long. This is actually a topwater specific rod that's made 7'4". Like I said, I want to keep everything level. I don't want the difference in the rod, so when I'm just grabbing one, grabbing another, switching baits all the time, I want it to feel the exact same. I want the rod to be pretty much like I didn't even change anything. That is something to help you just comfortable and confidence, and you have that confidence in that rod and that bait, whatever, and you don't have to think about changing what sort of rod you're throwing around, because it's the same. And the other thing on those topwater rods, they need to have a stout tip on them, but not like crazy. Okay, so that heavy, it's a heavy rod, but it's got a lighter tip in it than my heavy jig fishing rod, for the purpose of you twitching that bait, walking that bait around. You want that slightly lighter tip so that bait can move around really good. Better action on that bait. So really, you're just looking for a heavy rod with a lighter tip on it. You don't want like a broomstick feeling rod. Slightly shorter, it's just easier to twitch that bait, so you're not like hitting the water and everything. So next, 2 more rods that I forgot to grab. Alright, deep diving crankbaits. I use a 7'6" composite rod. You go to the store, you go to your Bass Pro Shops, your Cabela's, your Sportsman's Warehouse, your local tackle shop, wherever, to look at a rod. All of them pretty much are graphite rods now. Okay. Glass rods were kind of a thing of the past, but are still used, and some people swear by them for deep cranking. I do not. Okay. Deep cranking, I want a composite rod. The composite rod with graphite and glass in it. The reason why is glass rods, they have no sensitivity at all. you don't even know when you feel a fish. It's terrible. It's the most awkward, just strange thing. You don't, like, that rod doesn't load up, which you don't really want a rod to load up. So that's why the composite rods are good. That's the one good thing about glass. But the sensitivity is non-existent. It's terrible. You don't even feel when you get a bite. It's bad. And then also, they feel pretty awkward when you're using them, to me. But, like I said, deep diving crankbait rod that I use is a composite rod. And 7'6", I still stick with the 7'6". But the reason I use the composite rod is because if you're throwing a deep diving crankbait, you have all that pressure on that bait. You know, when you're just working it, that bait's down there. So much drag onto that bait that you just feel it in your arms the whole time. You throw a deep diving crankbait, like a 20-foot deep crankbait, for a couple of hours, your arms hurt. Like, it doesn't even matter if you catch a fish on it. It feels super uncomfortable on a graphite rod. That glass rod, it being less sensitive and also a little stouter sort of a rod. It's kind of stiffer. It feels a lot better. Cranking it all day, it doesn't put so much work on your hand and your arm and everything when you're just sitting there just cranking that sucker all the time. So that's one of the reasons I like it. But it has more sensitivity than just a straight up glass rod, so you can actually feel bites. Sometimes, you know, a fish on a crankbait is just gonna hit it and you're just cranking, not paying attention, you know, so you're still not gonna feel the bite. But it's a lot more sensitive than just a straight up glass rod. The other great thing about it is fighting the fish. The other big deal with glass rods was the parabolic bend. Alright, they gave those rods that parabolic bend with that material better than graphite. And now that's kind of changed because graphite rods have gotten better leaps and bounds over the last 10-20 years. Just the technology, the way they spin that graphite for those rods is so much better that most rods have a good bend in them, unless if they're super cheap rods, whatever. That's why I like these spiral light rods a lot. Sorry, wasn't going to mention it, but because of that good bend through the whole rod. What that does is that keeps less stress on you as well, because you're using that whole rod instead of just like the last quarter of that rod to fight that fish back to the boat or bank or whatever. But that's less stress on you and also gives you more leverage. You got that whole thing working with you instead of most of it working against you and then just that little bit working with you. So, but that's a great thing about those graphite glass composite rods, is that action on that rod with that combination of the two materials. So I also use that for swim baits, smaller swim baits. Not necessarily smaller. I make a big 8-inch swim bait that is lighter for you. Go and check it out. And I throw it on that rod instead of a big old extra heavy swim bait rod. So yeah. Oh, last one. Jerkbaits. Jerkbait rods they need to be smaller for the exact same reason. You're working that rod, get that bait twitching in there, jerking it. So you want that smaller rod so you're not smacking the water all the time, and it's easier to control your little twitches. Alright? And a medium I go medium or a medium heavy with a lighter tip. The rod that I actually use, and I'll just say it exactly, is a G Loomis E6X rod, and it is the 7'1" medium heavy extra fast action. Now, I'm not saying you need to get that rod exactly, but all that means is it's a medium heavy rod, so it has enough of that backbone that you need, but it has a smaller tip on it, so it's more reactive. So just find something like that, and I say 7 foot to 7'3" is what I like to go for. But like I said, mine's a 7'1", just a little bit smaller than what you're used to. For when you switch to that rod from a longer rod, you're not going to be sitting there smacking the water with the tip because you're used to that one. And also, it's just easier to control that bait. Alright, jerkbaits. That's pretty much it. And that goes for every jerkbait. Just use that rod. Okay? That's it. Sorry this was so long, but seriously, that was everything that I use, what you need to look for, why, and all that stuff. With the little tip in there of keeping your rod lengths similar for you. Trust me, that thing helps to do that, instead of constantly switching sizes and everything. Anyway, next week we'll talk about reels. I'm going to talk about every kind of reel for everything and why. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow.